Hi, everybody. It's Mercury retrograde time. Kathy Beal with Lindsay Merbaum, who is a very, very interesting and multifaceted person. I always love talking to people who do many, many different things. I found out about her as a mixologist who makes book tales, and then discovered her own writing and astonishing author. So, welcome. Hey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. It's
Oh,
such a pleasure.
I'm thrilled to do this. So I'm trying to set up another place where I can actually watch what's happening. Here we go. Um, what got you? Let's start with the whole business of writing. What kind of stuff did you read as a kid?
Um, Roald Dahl, quite a bit.
Ah,
Not knowing, of course, that he was a virulent anti-Semite. That I figured that out later. Um, I loved R.L. Stein's books. I read when I got to middle school. I started reading a lot of Anne Rice, which is very influential. I was raised in such a way where I was not allowed to watch things that had a lot of violent or sexual content, but I could read anything I wanted. So from the get-go, my taste tended towards the strange and kind of irreverent and also mystical and magical just from the jump. Was not so interested in Babysitter Club or like Anne of Green Gables kind of stuff, though I very much love Jane Austen, but right from the jump, it was like, the weird mystical, creepy mythology influenced stuff. I also really loved Greek mythology as a small child. I was already into it.
I read Bullfinch's mythology very young.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it's pretty dark stuff. I remember the school librarian actually reading some of the myths to us, and people get murdered and abducted and all kinds of stuff happens, but it's I guess because it's ancient, we consider it to be, child friendly, and so I don't know, but it had a big influence on me from the go. Was a lot of the old stories, which of course then you can see the influences of and the echoes of, and a lot of later tales and fiction, even for young people. And I really attached to all of those kind of mythic elements right away.
And how did you start writing?
Um, I don't really even know. I mean, I think even as a small child, I this is so cliche, but even as a small child, I really felt drawn to the idea of being a writer. I like fantasized about being an author and having my own books published. And I started writing stories when I was very small, basically as soon as I was able to write. And I got more serious about it, as I aged. Certainly by the time I graduated from college, I was pretty confident that I wanted to somehow build some kind of career as a writer. But the idea of being an author for whatever reason, just because I had a natural love of language or because my parents read to me or whatever it was, that was kind of there from the beginning. And I
Mhm.
feel like I've seen a lot of writers say that.
Yeah, I would say that. I just always wrote,
Yeah.
always.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like always the impulse was always there. I liked to draw, I liked to do other arts, but writing was always the one.
So when did you start? How did you start getting published? Did you start that with short form fiction, or how did that go?
I started publishing short stories probably around the time that I finished my MFA, so probably around like 2006 or so I started publishing. Until then, I'd taken a lot of writing courses even as a high school student. I studied writing in college. I got an MFA, but the emphasis wasn't really placed on publishing. And also I had to figure out how to even go about that. How does one even get published? So I started with short stories because that's also how I was educated to write. The idea was you learn to write stories and then that extrapolates to novels or other forms that you might write, in part because a story is, bite size enough to deal with within a class. So I began there, and I've published a number of stories over the years, but I haven't written a story in quite a while, and I haven't really actively worked to publish a story in a long time, because once I got into writing novels, I felt like this was where I was really hitting my stride, that this was really the form for me once I kind of started figuring out how to even put together a book, because a book is so unwieldy compared to a short story. And I think we all have different strengths. Some writers are great at everything. I think that where my talent really lies is in the long form, in the novel. So I don't really work on stories much anymore. Stories were kind of a vehicle for me to figure out how to actually write books.
Well, and how did you come to horror? Is horror part of the short story part of your past, or how did that come into your writing?
It all happened kind of organically, meaning without me really noticing.
Mhm.
I originally wrote very realist fiction for the most part. There were some magical elements that appeared here and there, but for the most part, it was very realist influenced. And I remember the first like purely magical realist story that I wrote, which was about an orphan girl who claims to the other children that she can turn into a bird. Um, and it was like a real departure for me from what I'd been working on. And from there, my work got more magical and more surreal and weirder. And I started to realize that that's what I felt called towards, but I had no knowledge of that going in. You know, I didn't like decide I'm going to be a writer and I'm going to be this kind of writer. The kind of writer that I developed into just sort of happened on its own. And my first book, The Gold Persimmon, was published by a feminist horror press and very much falls within the genre of feminist horror, meaning that it has horror elements, but it's literary, you know, it has strong feminist themes. But I honestly did not realize this was feminist horror until people started telling me so. Like
Interesting.
I didn't even realize how unsettling or even how weird it was until other people started reading it and telling me what they were seeing. And now I look back at myself reading Anne Rice in middle school. I look back at all my like weird, witchy, creepy interests and the kind of books that I love. And I go, oh, well, duh. Of course I was going to become like a feminist horror author. Like that's so obvious, you know, and there's like skulls around all around this room. Like obviously that was going to happen, but I really didn't see it opening up as it was actually in progress. It's looking back that I can see like, oh, clearly that's where I was headed with my work. But the
Mhm.
process happened organically. And so, you know, while I was in the throes of writing this book or working on different stories, like I just was writing what I was writing. I
Mhm.
just was writing the stories that came to me that I was interested in. And I did not overly concern myself with the genre or labeling that would apply to that work. And I think there's pros and cons to that. I think it's great for a writer to just create in a space where you're not necessarily concerned with the feedback you're going to get or with the marketing, the labeling that would put on your work because it allows it to just kind of flourish in its own space. But eventually there does need to come an interaction with the audience. And part of interaction with the audience is genre labeling, is that kind of identification of your work based on just how readers respond to it and how readers make sense of it. So looking at that, I'm like, okay, this all kind of comes together. But I like being within the feminist horror genre because it is a somewhat nebulous genre that overlaps with other areas of fiction. And so it creates a little space for me to experiment. And I also would say that the work I'm doing now, like the books I'm looking at publishing, are also feminist horror-ish, but also have more fantasy elements as well. So I'm still kind of playing around with genre no matter what I do, it seems.
So can we talk specifically about, let's see if I can get it so it would be seen, The Gold Persimmon, your debut novel. Um, it's not, it's a comfortable read for anybody who's familiar with, say, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I thought the magic realism in it was astonishing. And it also struck me as kind of an interesting dystopian modern contemporary version of Agatha Christie meets the Twilight Zone. Like, because there's all this stuff going on and you're not quite sure what's happening, and the things get sucked into a certain direction and they can't see how anybody is going to get out of it. And it takes there are two parts to it in parallel universes, both of which have the action centered in a hotel. Why a hotel? What does that mean to you? They're
First
very
of all, I love,
specialty hotels, by the way.
yeah, first of all, I love that description. Just even being mentioned in the same sentence as Garcia Marquez or, you know, or Agatha Christie is like such a boon to my ego. But yeah, people ask me that a lot. And I've actually always really been fascinated with hotels. I mean, there's an escapist element to hotels. Themed hotels, as the hotels in this book are of a special fascination to me because they just take the elements of hotels and just skew it to be weirder. A hotel is a liminal space. It's both public and private. All kinds of things happen in hotels: weddings, affairs, suicides, like all kinds of things happen behind closed doors in a way that is both entirely isolated and also influenced and affected by a lot of different people. There's a whole hive of activity going on in a hotel, some of which you see, some of which you don't, in terms of how the illusion of privacy is maintained in a hotel, given that there's a whole staff, devoted to making that happen. And so that just kind of really interests me in terms of a hotel as like a way station between worlds, And one of the hotels in the book, the Red Orchid, is inspired by the Japanese love hotels, which are hotels designed for people to have romantic trysts within. There's often themed rooms. There might be, access to various like toys and things like that. And it's really rather bizarre. I've seen a lot of photos of what these rooms might look like and the various themes that are employed, like igloo or like doctor's office or something. And it's kind of playing with sexy versus grotesque. And that's kind of a theme that plays out throughout the Gold Persimmon, is that line between what's titillating and what's actually on the edge of grotesque. So I just thought hotels were just like a fascinating backdrop where really anything could happen and where a lot of boundaries could be crossed or maintained or mixed, where there's just kind of this like automatic vibe of potential magic within hotels. As I said, as way stations between worlds, between realities, where different people are interacting who might never otherwise cross paths, where people are coming in with their own purpose that is unknown to the establishment. And that just really captures my imagination. I'm just really interested in what can be done with that. And certainly applying a specific kind of decor to it, a specific kind of theme to it, for me just sort of amplifies the weirdness, the inherent weirdness of a hotel. Because if you think about it, there is something strange about all these people who don't know each other sleeping in these rooms next to each other in this shared space under the premise of privacy and security. But, in reality, like anything could be happening, anything goes.
And in the middle part of the book, the notion of security is completely gone.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Right. All of those boundaries kind of break down over the course of the Gold Persimmon. So, you see like the Gold Persimmon Hotel itself struggling to maintain order and control over their guests, trying to prevent them from violence, from drunkenness. And you see how that fails. And the Red Orchid is designed for a certain kind of intimacy. And you see how that gets corrupted and skewed. And how, the sense of safety is completely upended, in part because of gender roles. So, I kind of take everything that we take for granted about the hotel and turn it over.
And the concept of grieving, or how people deal with loss, it appears to be a through line in all of this.
Yeah.
Did it just happen, or was that a deliberate, I am going to study how grief does weird things to people? Or
I think it happened organically. I think a lot of the writing of this book was really organic for me, in the sense that my subconscious was strongly at work as I was creating this book, and it made a lot of decisions that I made subconsciously later revealed themselves to have significance consciously as I started to kind of piece it all together. It felt a lot like putting a puzzle together. So grief, I think likewise, where I was at in my life when I started this book, I think that had an influence on my interest in exploring grief. I think a lot of just kind of accumulated trauma caused me to have a real interest in exploring grief, but I did not consciously say, I'm going to write a novel that really explores how people deal with grief and how grief intersects with other things like sex and loneliness. I think it just kind of developed organically out of the setting that I was drawn to and out of the characters I ended up choosing to place within that setting. So the book ends up being a lot about that, about how we process those feelings, about what it's like to be kind of gutted by that sort of loss and loneliness. And it's part of what makes the book unsettling and uncomfortable, honestly. But for me, I think it just developed naturally from a rather personal and maybe dark interest in that subject. I think again that was a decision that my subconscious made for me, and that later I consciously was like, oh yeah, that's happening. Okay, let's go with it.
I've experienced that in my own writing, so it's really cool when that happens. You go, wow, some part of me really understands what's happening here. Which leads me to an odd question. Did your characters talk to you? Did they tell you what they wanted to do or what they were going to do at any point?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of writers talk about their characters as independent people, like, oh, I guess I'm going this way with this book because the character has decided to do XYZ. And I wouldn't say that my relationship with my characters perfectly mimics that dynamic. I would say that I often begin a story with a character or with the idea of a character. And then as I'm writing, I kind of start discovering who they are, but I also consciously make decisions about who they're going to be. And, I end up asking myself a lot of questions about them. So the writing process is a process of discovery, but I still feel like, for better or worse, I'm in the driver's seat when it comes to what the characters are going to do or what they're up to. I don't feel like the characters are on their own acting in the story and I'm just kind of following along to try to catch up. I feel like there's more of a give and take there than so much just total agency given to the characters. But I've seen a lot of writers talk about characters that way, and I'm always going, am I missing something? Should it be different? I don't know.
I don't think it's a should, but what prompted this was I heard I had the incredible pleasure of meeting Madeleine L'Engle. Yes, I have her inscription in a book that I handed to her. Anyway, she actually talked about in the book, the Arm of the Starfish, that she was sitting writing and she became aware of a young man sitting in the chair in her room, and it was one of the characters who showed up in her periphery, and then she realized he had to be part of the story. And I went, that's pretty damn magical. So
wow.
Yeah,
that has not happened to me. It sounds really intense.
yeah.
That has not happened to me. I'm missing out on that. I have not. I have a lot of characters that are ghosts, but no ghosts have actually come to me and said like, hey, I'm going to be a character per se. Wow. If that happens, you'll be the first to know.
Sure. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yes, please, please. So I'm scanning through my notes here. Oh, okay. So one label I have heard put on your book that's a little more, has more words in it than the ones we've used so far is queer feminist horror. Can you elaborate on that? That just means that there are characters who are not straight women, or too simplistic?
It does mean that there are a lot of queer characters in the Gold Persimmon. I guess if we're thinking of a question of what differentiates a work of literature with queer characters versus like a queer work of literature, I think I would say that it really boils down to perspective and intention. This book involves a lot of queer characters of varying nature, from like lesbian to bisexual to non-binary. So I'm using that word very broadly when I say queer. But I think what's different about that is that it's very much written from a queer perspective. For example, I've had readers say to me, your book doesn't really it's not dumbing down queer culture for straight people to understand. It's presented as is, and you can kind of catch on or follow along, versus, a book that is written with the intention of, I am going to help straight people understand this or that, or I'm going to help, this group of people understand that perspective. And I think that again comes down to the subconscious driving a lot of the work. Again, I didn't sit down thinking, I'm going to write a book that has queer characters, and like straight people are somehow going to get it, but I'm not going to, explain anything overtly. I'm just going to, help them see things. And there was no conscious decision like that. I wrote the story as it came to me. One of the linchpin relationships in the book is a relationship between two women. But the test of any queer relationship in terms of how it relates in a story is, well, could you change the gender of these characters and would the relationship still play out? And yes, you absolutely could change the gender. Certain things would be different. Certain things would be more or less obvious about their power dynamic, for example, but you could do that. And the impact of the relationship, the emotional heft it has would remain the same. But as a queer feminist writer, I live in a queer feminist world. I write from that perspective because that is my reality. And so I'm kind of just sharing that on the page with my readers and inviting them to have that experience and come along. And I think if you just have an open mind about it, I think as we should whenever we open a book, it can be kind of a fun journey. It could be a journey of exploration as well, because one of the best ways to learn about an experience that might be different from yourself or an identity that you might not share is absolutely through fiction. And I think very much through fiction that is not necessarily written for everyone in the sense that it is presenting a particular experience and perspective, and that is presented as just as valid as a quote unquote mainstream experience or perspective. And we can all find the commonality of humanity within that. Because the themes of grief or heartbreak or loss are universal, regardless of the particular character's relationships or the particular gender identity or their particular sexual identity. So that's something I'm interested in exploring in my work. And I'm also interested in talking about sex in my work. But again, I come at it from like, these are things I'm thinking about. These are things that I'm, dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so here is that reflection of that world in the world that I've created.
Thank you. You want to talk about mixology?
Sure, I always want to talk about mixology.
Okay, so how did you come to cocktails? What's your cocktail origin story?
I thought I've been asked this a lot, and my answer to this question has changed because sometimes when people ask you a question repeatedly, you start reflecting a little bit differently and you start going a little bit deeper. I used to say, oh, well, I just kind of fell into it because I started drinking a lot of great cocktails around in the Bay Area. And so I wanted to kind of mimic what I was drinking at home. And so I started experimenting with liqueurs and bitters. And then I started doing themed cocktails for workshops I was running. And then eventually what really initiated the change was doing a set of cocktails and mocktails for the Gold Persimmon as a pre-order giveaway item. And that is all true. But the reality is that my interest in like creating something people could enjoy with their physical palate, creating like some kind of alchemical potion-y, magic really started way earlier. I went to school to study writing. I thought about becoming a sociologist, it didn't happen. But, after that whole like liberal arts education thing, I was like, man, I really should have gone to like culinary school or something like that, because then I would have this like concrete skill that would be very marketable and that would overlap with an area of interest of mine, which is food and drink. So I always had this passion for comestibles. And I think one of the experiences that shaped me for better and for worse was many years ago. I had been teaching in South America. I moved back to the US after that experience, and I landed in San Francisco where I'd never lived before. And my first job was as a live-in chef / assistant / servant, whatever, to this couple who were engaged in the raw food lifestyle and wanted someone to make all their food and wanted someone to help them write a book. And I became that person for them. And it was the first time I was dealing with flavors and the palate in a way that was severely restricted and limited, in the sense that things couldn't be cooked. Everything had to be organic. There couldn't be any dairy. There couldn't be this, there couldn't be that. And I found that really fun and really challenging. And for me, cocktails take that experience of a limited challenge, like cutthroat kitchen kind of stuff where like you only have so much you can work with in so much time. It takes that experience of limitations and expands on it, because you can make a cocktail that imitates a particular dessert or a particular experience. You can make creepy cocktails. You can make holiday cocktails. You can kind of do all kinds of creative things with cocktails. And at the same time, you're dealing with something that is intoxicating, that is presented in a beautiful glass. And all of that just really appeals to my witchy little sensibility about like what is fun and what's fun about sharing with other people, what's fun about playing hostess, and what's fun about working with flavors. So I think I had this in me for a long time, and I just didn't find it until like, I don't know, 3-4 something years ago. And then when I started making cocktails based off books, book tales, that's when it kind of blew up, because it started to really bring other people into it, because other people wanted me to do this for their books.
So the first one, you came up with this idea with your own book.
Yeah, actually, my spouse claims that it was their idea.
I see.
And I'm like, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure it was my idea. But anyway, someone had the idea that I should do a set of drinks for the Gold Persimmon as a kind of creative pre-order giveaway to incentivize readers to pre-order books, because as all authors know, like pre-orders are very important in terms of how your sales appear and are ranked. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to make, a booklet of drinks to go with my book. No sweat, no big deal. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no idea the testing, the repeated photographing, the precision that would come with making 12 drinks to be shared with the public, that had to be consistent and on point. That was a little bit of trial by fire for me in terms of how does this mixology thing work? How do I make drinks that other people can imitate? It was really fun. It was also just really exhausting.
See, I had only one for my book. I sent out a call for my book, Eat, Drink, and Be Wary. I sent out a call among all of my mixologist friends and said, make a cocktail for my book. And we ended up with a variation on the Dark and Stormy, which I love, called Party Out of Bounds, named for the B-52 song, which kind of also really fits my book. And that same person who made that, who was my webmaster, actually designed a special cracker to go with it too. At any rate, but that was just one. So the fact that you did a dozen, wow.
Yeah, I really bit off more than I could chew. Well, I mean, I completed the project. It was great. So I wouldn't say that, but I really did not know what I was getting myself into when I decided I was going to do that many. Yeah, doing one is a lot. Doing 12 was intense, but I have no regrets. I'm so glad I did it. I still really love the recipes that I made, and they're still really tasty. And, it led me to doing that for other people, which was a really lovely and rewarding experience to be able to honor someone else's book by creating something so specialized for them. And, as a way of also just kind of talking about their book and expressing what you got about their book. So, I have no regrets, but I tend to do things the hard way. And that was just one example.
I am in my head charting your astrology chart. Just from that piece of information. Anyway, what I'm wondering is, without revealing trade secrets, how do you generally go about it when someone says, if you're going to create a book tale for somebody else's book and you haven't been part of the writing process?
Yeah.
Generally, how do you go about it?
There are no trade secrets. It's really just me like rolling up my sleeves and just diving in there. I mean, the first thing seems so obvious, but I read the book. Like I read every darn word. I take copious notes, and it's sometimes hard to explain what I'm looking for. I'm looking for obviously any mention of flavors or smells. Like anytime they eat or drink something, okay, I'm on it. But I've booktailized books that have no reference to any food whatsoever. I booktailized a poli-sci textbook. Okay, so it can be done with anything. It doesn't have to be what the characters eat and drink. And also what they eat and drink might not actually be relevant. So what I'm really looking for is there a flavor that represents something important that happens? Like the characters are drinking wine when they have this really big discussion that changes the course of the story, or the character smells lavender or something at this moment where they have there are some memories being embedded that becomes really important. Like, what are the themes? What's the recurring imagery? I'm just kind of looking for things to harvest from the book, basically. Like, what can I pluck from the book that I could then somehow transform into actual ingredients? And the challenge is, of course, to make them all taste good together within the standards of cocktail making. Like, there needs to be some kind of base alcohol. There needs to usually be some kind of balance of like sweet and bitter or sour and sweet. These are kind of the tenets of making a drink. But really what I'm looking for is, what's important in this story, and how do those important moments or symbols or scenes, how can they relate to the senses, basically, and how can I represent them in the senses? And then it turns into taking a photograph of it. I do a whole write-up of the book as well, talking about the plot. And, I always try to quote from the book to give a sense of what the writing is like, et cetera. So it's like its own little review packaged with the recipe and presented visually, which is also important too, because looking at a recipe, you can't taste it. So you need some kind of visual reference to get a sense of what is this like. But it's really about like, how do I represent this book through another medium? Like creating a song out of a text, or creating text out of a song. How do you kind of transform it into something else? And that's where the magic comes in.
And the visual element of this can't be underestimated, because you have a phenomenally seductive Instagram feed. I'm always making comments about the absolute beauty of the styling for each one. It's just not like, here's a glass and it has liquid in it. There's a little environment created, and it always has an atmosphere.
Thank you for saying that. That means a lot to me. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned, I think at the beginning of our chat, that I have a lot of interest in various aspects of the arts, and I actually think that if I had not been bitten by the writing bug from day one, I probably would have tried to pursue visual art of some sort. Maybe not successfully, but I think that would have been my next path, because that was something that I always really loved. And it's fun for me that the cocktails involve that element, because a photograph is like an exercise in illusion. I'm crafting a backdrop for each book tale that is meant to match the book cover, is meant to evoke certain elements about the book. But also, as a two-dimensional art, it is kind of an optical illusion in terms of the figure foreground reversal, in terms of what's in focus and what isn't, and I love playing around with that. And I love using a lot of like natural elements, or just kind of getting creative with weird things like clay or marzipan or tinfoil and stuff like that. For me, it's really fun. It is at times exhausting when you're like, get this little thing, just stop falling over, things like that, or like, the garnish won't stay. But it is really fun to do the visual element as well, because I agree with you. I think that we kind of need that to entice us, and to kind of inspire the imagination in terms of what the drink might taste like. Because most people look at a recipe and they're like, I have no idea what that's going to be like, So I try to use the photos as well to embody something about the book, and to also entice people to check out the book as well, because ultimately the goal is read more books, everyone. That's the goal.
Well, and you do this also with witchy potions, with potions that match what's going on with the wheel of the year. So you've said witchy and magical things like that a number of times in this conversation. So that's were you born one? I mean, it's always just been what you do.
I think so, but I didn't figure it out for a long time. Same as, the feminist horror thing. I was like, oh yes, this is so obvious, but I did not notice. Yeah, I mean, calling yourself a witch was like not something that people did as I was growing up. The neo-pagan movement has kind of, and the Wiccans have kind of gained a lot of steam and a lot of respect over the past, say, 5-10 years. But this was a rather taboo identity. And I remember a few years ago realizing that it was actually possible to say, like, nowadays in our time, yeah, I'm pagan, or like, yeah, I'm witchy, and have that be cool without people thinking that you were completely off your rocker. I mean, I'm sure there's some people who still think that, but it's all a question of perspective. Yeah, I created a set of recipes for each Sabbat of the year. So Pagan Calendar has the Wheel of the Year, there are 8 Sabbats, and I created 4 recipes for each of them. And that was a 10-month project. So we talked about how much work the initial 12 book tales were, but this has been an even more involved process, culminating in 32 recipes. And the full deck, because it's like a tarot deck of recipes, is coming out next month in digital and print form. And actually, you can pre-order them now if you want to, because in book style, I'm offering pre-orders if people want. But yeah,
I've got 2 on order.
Yay! They're coming soon. They're coming soon. That was really fun, and also a lot of work. And I found that part of the work of it was just that over the course of 10 months, my style evolved, my practices changed. And so I had to go back and reshoot some photos. I nixed some of the recipes I originally designed because I was like, nah, I have better ideas now. And so part of the challenge is just keeping up with your own growth. And I think this is true for us as writers as well. Like, I look at the Gold Persimmon and I'm like, well, here are things I'm doing differently next time, or here are things I've learned or grown from going forward. And I think that if you can recognize that growth in yourself, awesome. That's great, because I think that's the goal, of course, to always keep growing. But it does create more work for you in the short term.
A couple more questions about the mixology before we wander off. You have a workspace for this. You have a home. When I say a home bar, it's not just that you have a cabinet with a bunch of alcohol bottles on it. You actually have a working cocktail mixing space, right?
Yeah, I do. Well, okay, so much to my poor spouse's dismay, our whole house is basically my working space. We have a number of fridges, and there's stuff in all of them. Yeah, I have a home bar. We bought a very strange house that somebody happened to add bars to in different rooms, and so we've updated those and upgraded them. But our house already had bars built in. It was clearly built by people who wanted to have a good time, so perfect for us. I'm also going to have access soon to a professional kitchen space, which I will be sharing with other artisans, so I can start making more syrups and other things like that people can then purchase from me, and it will all be by the book and up to code of the health department. So I'm excited to have a literal professional workspace. But I do have a bar in my living room, and my kitchen there's always something bubbling, some syrup or something. But yes, it's fun to have a bar in my living room, and there's a drawer of alcohol that just rolls out, and it weighs like 50 pounds.
And what are you drinking today?
Okay, so today I'm drinking a floating pumpkin, which is one of the Merbaum recipes. For those who don't know, Merbaum is starting the 22nd of this year, I believe, September 22nd to 29th, is the second harvest festival in the Wheel of the Year. And this is made with pumpkin milk, which is a combo of pumpkin filling, cinnamon, sugar, and milk, along with vodka and sparkling water. So if you've ever had a gin fizz and you can kind of think about what that combo of like a little bit of fizz with sweetness is like. So this is kind of a light, airy, pumpkin-y cocktail that has coffee bitters in it. So really lovely for people who love pumpkin spice things, but also approachable for those who find the pumpkin spice a little bit too heavy. This is kind of a lighter vodka-y rendition of that. So cheers. Cheers to fall.
And I am drinking a New York State, it's called Union Grove Distillery, rye whiskey that has the slowest burn I've ever encountered.
Ooh, I love rye. Do you like Manhattans? Are you a Manhattan fan?
Not particularly, oddly.
Okay.
We were talking earlier, I went to a festival at the grounds of Bethel Woods, which is where Woodstock was held. And every time I stopped, there was another astonishing distillery. At one point I thought, oh man, this is an exercise in white privilege, because I stopped at this vodka place where They broke, I think I told you I think it's called 1857 vodka. They grow their own potatoes. It's
Astounding.
organic potatoes, and everyone standing. It turned out that the guy who showed up, there was one man in this group of women tasting all these different vodkas. I think they had 5 or 6 different types. Had the local Subaru dealership, and so we all started trading our Subaru stories. Like everybody drinking this organic vodka was a Subaru owner and white, and I thought, yeah,
Yeah, that's a super white people moment.
this is something here. Anyway, there were other places that I'd stop, and all too frequently someone would say, well, here, try this, and I go, well, I don't really drink this, and I would drink it and go, oh no, and I got a credit card out, bring it with me. So
that's so much fun though. So much
it is, and it also leads to the thrill, and I really prefer supporting local producers, people who actually, and talking to the people who actually make their stuff.
Yeah,
it just seems so much more real.
Yeah.
And
I'm with you 100% on that. I live in Michigan, and there are all kinds of there are lots of distilleries in Michigan making a lot of great whiskey, for example, but also vodka and gin and stuff. And I love connecting with them, trying their wares, hanging out in their space. There's nothing quite like hooking up with a local distillery and getting the story behind how they're made, what they're making. And there's something different about drinking a liquor, like knowing the people that made it. There's something really special about that. So I encourage everyone to check out local distilleries, because I guarantee you have some in your state, wherever you are.
And there are a surprising and growing number of them that are women owned and women run. There's one in the Hudson Valley called Cooper's Daughter that I stumbled on at another farmer's market, and that was also dangerous. Yeah, their stuff is frighteningly good. And they have an Airbnb on the grounds where you can go for the weekend. Beautiful, beautiful old farmhouse. Stumble out to the cocktail garden. Don't have to drive anywhere. Drink your fill. Stumble back to your place. Yes, I've got plans. And there's another place I'm going to send you information about called TNT Bitters, and their bitters are amazing. And they send them out in fake dynamite.
That's so cool. I would love that, especially because, laws being what they are, it's hard to get liquor shipped to you unless you're in a state that's friendly to that, which most aren't. But bitters you can ship wherever. Mm-hmm. So you can always get bitters from different makers. Yep. That sounds fun.
And this is another example of going to a festival, to a market, and just wandering around and talking to the people at the booths. People will tell you their stories. And it always makes it much more interesting to me. When I was a food writer, when I would go to the fancy food show in the Javits Convention Center in New York City, which is like 4 football fields large, the stuff I remembered was when the owner who had made it was standing there talking to me about how he or she had made, and the stories were always so much better than whatever the factory produced stuff was that was being shunted off on people. So
yeah, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. So the final thing I would like, before we head off, you have advice for writers?
My advice to other writers, I think this applies kind of regardless of where you are and your stage in development. My advice is to connect with other writers. And that seems really obvious and silly, but there's a lot of strength to be found in community. The opportunity to create book tales to other writers only came about because I was connecting through Facebook and other means with other writers who were also putting books out and going through the same things. And I thought about, what do I have uniquely to offer other writers that would help them or make them feel good or just like brighten their day. And I don't think that the power of that connection can ever be underestimated. When I was starting out my publishing journey, I thought that I had connections simply because I knew other writers out there in the world. And I discovered that is not really the same thing. Joining a writers group where you promote and talk about each other's work, where you share your triumphs and have shoulders to cry on, and also maybe even like jump in when, I don't know, a troll's attacking your friend or something. This is what sustains us as writers. This is a really tough business that we're in. It is not a very logical or lucrative business. And so knowing that you can give to others just for the sake of of connection and for expressing what is your appreciation for their work and their efforts will really make you feel like you're doing something worthwhile, that you're part of something that is bigger than yourself, beyond your book. And I think that is really what keeps us going. And I think that is really what keeps us coming back to this crazy process. So I would say to other writers, always shout out the books you love. Don't be afraid to contact the writers whose work you appreciate and tell them so, even if they're like New York Times bestseller, super famous people. Trust me, they still want to hear from you. And, just always keep in mind, like, what could I do for the others? What could I do for this community? How can I be part of this conversation? Because that is how all of us grow.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate you spending time. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate being invited to join, and it's been lovely talking to you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.